Hello viewers. Today we'll be discussing a very interesting topic, urban environmental sustainability critical issues. By now, everybody will accept the fact that the 21st century is said to be an urban century, with 2/3 population living in urban areas, and there is a massive shift from rural to urban areas. What is very interesting to know is that in 1975 there were just 3 mega cities, Tokyo, New York and Mexico. Today, if you look into, most of the mega cities are spread in developing countries of the world. The number of mega cities are increasing, and what we have today, smart cities, compact cities, satellite cities. Now the question is, if these cities are a trend in the 21st century, are they habitable, sustainable and environment friendly? In this lecture, we will try to understand the challenges of urban environmental sustainability. How do people live in urban areas? Are cities truly smart? Don't they have any problems? And why are people increasingly migrating to urban areas where we just find a contradiction of sort? On the one hand, we have palatial apartments, multi-storied residential complexes. At the other extreme, we have shanties and slums, where we have growth of diseases and urban sanitation problems. Let us try to understand the complex challenges to urban environmental sustainability. But before that, we need to understand why is this trend towards urban migration. Today's cities have the potential to be viable centers of economic, social and cultural activity. Not just that. Cities are the hub of facilities, innovation, creation and a place where you have all the facilities at the touch of a button. On an average, people who live in cities have higher incomes and live healthier, easier lives than their rural counterpart. Historically, cities have always been the hub of economic activities right from the days of Indus Valley, Harappa, Mohenjo-daro. But then, today's cities are much different from the cities of yesteryears. Cities have also provided capital, labor, and the necessary infrastructure for investment to flow into cities. Now, we also need to understand that when we speak of cities or satellite cities, we are not referring to developed nations of the world. We are referring to the developing countries of the South. Today, growth rates are extremely high in the cities of Southeast Asia and Latin America, something which was unimaginable in the 1960s as well as 70s. Cities in these regions offer many advantages from rural villages, having more employment opportunities, superior infrastructure, and therefore they are a source of attraction for the rural population. The result is that cities have become the new age residential complex, but that also gives rise to many varied problems which are multifarious and multi-pronged. Although many people live in relatively comfortable, high-serviced homes, we also find a large plethora of people living in shanty towns, illegal settlements with conditions as bad as in the poorest of habitats. Now, let us try to understand one important area of challenge, population and urban settlements. Is there any relationship between population dynamics in urban settlements or cities? Kingsley Davis presented a clear framework for understanding population dynamics and urban growth, defining the process of urbanization as, and I quote him, the switch from a spread out pattern of human settlement to one of concentration in urban centers. It is clear that Although this process has occurred throughout the world at various levels during all times of human history, but there is also a history of the city. And this is unique and different from one city to another city. The history of the city of New York or Tokyo or Bangalore or Mumbai is considerably different given the fact that they have different phases of settlements of human population. Kingsley Davis has stressed the impact of excessive population growth on world urbanization, predicting that the less developed countries would eventually be unable to sustain their population. He concluded that there would be an end to urbanization, but not necessarily to absolute population growth, economic development, physical size of cities, or the absolute number they might contain. Urbanization is going to end in the long run because cities will have a saturation point at one point of time in the future days to come. The end of urbanization, which is a thesis of Kingsley Davis, occurs in industrialized countries where there is no longer a large enough rural population to create a significant migration to cities, or the suburban population begins to increase as fast as the urban population. The question that was raised by Davis is, how long and for how many years will the rural population migrate to the urban cities? There would be a limit when there would be no rural people to migrate to the cities. What happens then? What will happen to the cities? Will they remain what they are now? But there is another side of the story. Cities are considered to be engines of growth and development. Their concentration of people and activities in cities are extremely high, which ensures that resources are used highly efficiently in cities than in rural areas. They also generate a disproportionate amount of revenue for the government. In almost all developed cities, you'll find it is the urban population who contributes to the income tax paid to the government. And the government survives on the taxes paid by the urban population. The role of cities in the growth of national economies is perhaps best illustrated in China, where urbanization was an explicit government policy for accelerated economic growth, raising tens of millions of poor rural peasants out of poverty. So urbanization was a dedicated policy of the government in China since the 1980s. At the same time, local city governments have utilized the associated demand for housing and property development to massive boost for revenues. One thing you must have noticed, students, that all these urban mega cities are also giving rise to suburban areas, in the sense that the fringe of the cities are now developing faster than the core of the cities. So much so that we have para-cities coming up, para-urban areas coming up associated with the metropolitan city. The economic role of cities have gained further importance in this era of globalized development. They serve as centers for finance and economic activity. It is very interestingly said that it is the cities where globalization takes place. It is the cities where globalization works, and it is the cities where you have the effect of globalization taking place. The fact that cities create wealth, enable global economic transactions, and offer great life opportunities to the public does not negate the fact that there are a number of challenges that people living in cities face. And therefore, let's come to the challenges that cities face in terms of urban environmental sustainability. The first thing that we can notice when it comes to challenge is the cities face a rise of intra-urban social inequalities. If you just look into the conglomeration of cities, you'll find on the one end you have the super rich population living. At the other extreme, we have extremely poor people seething in poverty in slums and shanty towns. On the one side, you have plush apartments. On the other extreme, you have poverty-stricken population who go to great lengths in order to eke out a living. So the first important challenge faced by urban habitat is intra-urban inequality. Not all have the same standard of living. In the north, this is often manifested in terms of relative income, poverty, crime, social exclusion. So cities are also places where illegal activities take place. So this is one of the greatest challenges faced by governments. How to combat the growing incidence of crimes and various forms of illegal activities happening in and around cities. In 2005 Bristol Accord, the European Union placed the development of sustainable communities at the center of urban policy, emphasizing, among other things, inclusivity, equity, fairness, good governance, safety, and accessibility. So if we have to create urban sustainable centers, we have to focus on good governance in the cities. All these concerns apply to almost all countries of the world where you find that cities do not represent equity, they do not represent fairness or justice in any form. Urban areas often face another challenge, and that is high urban population density, intricate transport network, and dense commercial and industrial areas. All these have a cascading impact on environment and health issues. There are too many people, too less transport. There are too many people, too less houses. And what is more important, this also places pressure on municipal governance or local governance. Cities with their concentrated population and infrastructure and are especially vulnerable to climate change and environmental degradation. If you look across environmental climate impact, you will find it is the cities who face the impact of flash floods, heat waves, pollution, noise, soil contamination, so on and so forth. Their aggregated consumption pattern in the cities also lead to biodiversity loss. According to estimates in 2020, 96% of the people living in European Union cities were exposed to level of air pollution by fine particulate matter above the World Health Organization guideline. Also, building stock account for 40% of energy consumption and 36% of GHG emissions. We also need to understand that United Nations General Assembly have acknowledged the fact that urban areas faces severe challenges, and therefore there have been a number of conferences which seek to address the issue of how are we going to maintain urban environment sustainability. Now, in 1972, when the Stockholm Conference took place, the first important aspect that was taken in was not just the natural environment. It was the human environment which was also an important factor in the deliberations in the Stockholm Conference. The Stockholm Conference, for example, emphasized the fact that man has the fundamental right to live in an environment of quality, and also that he has a responsibility for protecting the environment, not only for the present generation, but also for the future generation, thus giving rise to the idea of sustainable development, where we use the natural resources, keeping in mind the needs and aspirations of the future generation. About a decade later, to address the issues pertaining to continuing depletion of natural resources and unsustainable development, the World Commission on Environment and Development was created, which was popularly called the Brundtland Commission, which described sustainable development as development that meets the needs of the present generation without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Now, we also need to understand that the subsequent Earth summits, Agenda 21, also focused on various aspects of sustainable development without losing sight of the importance of urban sustainability and governance issues. And that is the reason why Agenda 21 focused on the fact that we need to ensure that we reduce poverty, provide clean air, provide health care, and protect the natural resources. Also, it should be noted that the Millennium Development Goals have been stressing on the creation of urban cities which are environmental friendly. We also need to understand that the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has stressed the importance of social as well as environmental equity in development. Cities today are at the center of many environmental discussions and deliberations. We need to understand that urban areas are important. They are important for growth and development. But at the same time, urban areas should not become centers of pollution and environmental degradation. Sustainable urban development needs to be the solution of the hour. The only way to remove and encounter and overcome the challenges of urban environmental sustainability is to bring about sustainable urban development. Now, what is sustainable urban development? It refers to achieving a balance between development of the urban areas and protection of the environment with an eye on equity in employment, shelter, basic services, social infrastructure, and transportation in urban areas. With rapid expansion of urban population around the world, there is also a widespread awareness that we are the ones who can bring about a change in the city style of living. Concerns are raised on the fact that if you look into the urban-rural balance, urban areas are the areas of massive environmental pollution and degradation. Rural areas have a simple lifestyle with hardly any pollution at all. In order to mitigate the problem, we need to ensure that depletion of non-renewable resources are minimized, and we move on to environment sustainable living standards. Just by focusing on urban development all problems cannot be mitigated. There are certain steps that should be taken by national governments in order to make cities more habitable, more environment friendly. One of those steps are integration of the principles of sustainable development in policies and programs of the entire country. Secondly, focusing on reversal of the loss of environmental resources. Thirdly, focusing on the reduction of the proportion of population without sustainable access to safe drinking water. And most importantly, we cannot ignore the plight of the slum dwellers. If you remember, Mrs. Gandhi in the Stockholm Conference said that poverty was the worst pollutant. And it was poverty in the city areas that should be reduced in order to bring about long-term environmental sustainable policies. Now, one thing is important to understand: how much of the Earth's surface do the cities cover? It is interesting to note that cities cover just 2% of the Earth's surface. I am referring to the world cities. But they consume 96% of the natural resources of the Earth. And therefore, they are the ones who contribute to maximum pollution and waste. And that is the reason why you will find most of the environmental problems and health problems being located in the city style of living. We need to understand another important aspect, that there is now a debate on what kind of environmental sustainability, and the debate has centered on the green agenda and the brown agenda. Let us try to study the green and the brown agenda. The green agenda is global, which involves what is referred to as concerns like addressing global warming, climate change, ozone layer depletion, loss of biodiversity, deforestation, exhaustion of non-renewable resources. This is the green agenda. And this green agenda covers cities across the world. Cities of the world, you will find, are affected by all these concerns which affect the world population as a whole. Therefore, governments and environmentalists are moving towards adoption of an agenda to create a green, clean earth under the banner of the green agenda. Now, while the green agenda is more global, the brown agenda is more confined to the problems of the city. Now, global environmental problems are for all, but the brown agenda confines the city problems. It can refer to air and water pollution, inadequate waste management, lack of basic services, green areas, declining infrastructure, poor housing conditions, as well as issues of health, crime, violence, and social exclusion. This is the brown agenda. The brown agenda concerns social problems faced by city dwellers. Among developing countries, it is a common problem that this brown agenda is more important than the green agenda. We need to give importance to the fact that violence, crime, illegal activities in cities should be responded to at the earliest to provide sustainable living standards to the people. Now, while there is no clear-cut dividing line between the green and the brown agenda and saying that we should follow just the brown agenda or the green agenda, but one is important, that this green and brown agenda has differences in terms of spatial, temporal, and political. The brown agenda addresses environmental burdens located in cities and urban areas, and they affect just the urban inhabitants. The brown agenda does not impact the rural population as a whole. But when we are referring to the green agenda has a far more widespread spatial impact in terms of affecting both the urban population as well as rural population, because students, climate change, deforestation does not impact just the urban population, it affects one and all, whether you live in the villages or you live in the cities. Now, we need to understand that both carry complementarities and both have entered into conflict with each other. Aware of the mismatch between the global green agenda as well as the brown agenda, researchers and non-governmental organizations have been advocating a renewed focus on brown agenda, and they are emphasizing on the fact that we need to address concerns of pollution, poverty, and health, and later on we can address issues pertaining to climate change and other issues relating to global environmental challenges. Now, how do we try to provide for a sustainable urban development? And when we are speaking of sustainable urban development, we cannot lose sight of the Habitat 2 or the City Summit Conference, which happened in Istanbul in 1996, which provided a plethora of guidelines how we can create sustainable urban habitats around the world. Let us take a look at the Istanbul Declaration on Human Settlements. What does the declaration say? The declaration points out to a number of challenges that cities across the globe, both in developed and developing countries, are facing. Paragraph 4 of the Habitat Agenda, Istanbul Declaration of Human Settlement, identified certain core problems. And these core problems, students, are unsustainable consumption and production patterns, which means we consume more than required, we produce more than required, and we waste more than is required. Unsustainable population changes in the structure and distribution of popularity. Third is very important, homelessness. You have a huge number of people spending their lives on the pavements, and that is unsustainable for urban development. Next important area highlighted by the Istanbul Declaration was increasing poverty, when poverty should decline if cities are offering more opportunities. Another important problem that they highlight is growing unemployment in the cities. If cities are the hubs of unemployment, why are people migrating from rural areas to urban areas? Next important point that they have raised is social exclusion and family instability. The rise of separation of families and the growth of nuclear families is a result of urban developmental patterns and, most importantly, inadequate resources. They have further focused on a number of other problems such as lack of basic infrastructure and services to the people, lack of adequate planning, growing insecurity and violence, and most importantly, increasing vulnerability to disasters and environmental degradation. Now, how can climate change and urban sustainability be addressed together? While planning for sustainable development of towns, we need to give more importance to planning. In other words, instead of irregular habitation and settlement patterns coming up anywhere in the cities, we need to create planned cities and ensure that these planned cities have the basic infrastructure needed for urban sustainability. Explaining implication of climate change for sustainable development, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change notes, sustainable development definitely needs a goal. We need development, but definitely not at the cost of environment. Therefore, we need to understand that when we are facing climate change, we need to ensure that the city people, city dwellers are more aware, more concerned about the lives they are leading. Human influences can lead to greater carbon emissions, and we need to make the people aware of how we ourselves are responsible for the degradation of the environment. There have also been an impact on urban areas more than rural areas. If you look into heat waves, flash floods, if you look into the kind of extreme climate changes that we find, it can be located in the settlement pattern in urban areas. While in the case of rural areas, we have scattered settlements. In urban areas, we have nuclear compact settlements. These compact settlements can lead to cascading negative impact on the environment. Urban areas also face loss of green cover. The loss of green cover will have cascading impact on how we live a life within the cities. Now let us try to move on city forms. Students, you must have heard of terms like satellite cities, compact cities, smart cities. What are these? These are various forms of city-based infrastructure that are being used by the new age architectural firms in order to provide for various forms of sustainable livelihood and compact lives. We have less space and more people to live, and therefore we need smart cities to accommodate the increased population coming in from different parts of the world. We also need to address the fact that cities today are the hub of employment also. Therefore, the migration takes place not just from rural areas but also from towns and smaller metropolitan areas. Hence, cities have to bear a lot of population coming in from diverse places. One important challenge in terms of city forms is the question of utilities. What kind of services that are given by the cities, and what are the challenges that people face when it comes to utilities that are offered? When we speak of utilities, we are referring to water supply, electricity supply, sanitation measures offered to the people. Now students, there is an interesting question that can be raised. When it comes to free water supply provided by the municipal governments, do you think everybody receives the same amount of water supply? The answer is negative. Some high-rise apartments receive continuous, uninterrupted flow of water supply, while slum areas have a limited supply of water. Therefore, when we look to urban areas and when it is the question of providing utilities, not all people and not all areas receive the same amount of water supply. Water supply varies with the type of living, the area of living and the spatial location. This is one inequality that is faced when it comes of urban sustainable development. Also, it has been noticed that when it comes to water supply, we cannot ignore the role of piped water supply. While some houses and dwellings, high rises, have piped water supply, we also find there's another end of the city which lacks any form of water supply and is susceptible to acute water shortages from time to time. Next comes in the role of transport. While it is the rich who have access to personal means of transport and communication, it is the poor who bear the impact of pollution caused from emission from these vehicles. Therefore, we need to understand that unless and until there is some form of equity in terms of transportation and infrastructure, it is the poor who are going to bear the burden of greater utilities being used by the rich. Therefore, we find that cities are spaces where there is more socio-economic inequalities than the rural areas. Another important aspect that is we need to focus on is the concept of compact city development. The compact city development model aims to optimize energy use, promote renewable energy resources, provide integrated transport network, and with a focus of enhancing public transportation, cycle routes, change the culture of energy and resource consumption. But do you think all the people are aware of this compact city model where energy efficient measures should be implemented at the earliest? Ultimately, we need to understand that when we have compact city styles coming up, we also need to emphasize on the type of production system that is being used. The next important and the last part of the discussion focuses on ecological footprints of cities. While we have understood the concept of impact of carbon footprints, we also need to lose sight of the fact that cities are emerging as the hubs of greatest infrastructural development, but we are losing out on the green cover. Now, we need to understand that cities cannot be created at the cost of ecology. We cannot cut down our forests as well as the green cover in order to create more spaces for more luxurious homes. Therefore, urban population has to create awareness about the fact that they become ecologically conscious about the kind of resources that their urban living is leading to. So depletion of the green cover is an important area and an important challenge the city is facing. With depletion of green cover, cities are facing the increasing challenge of ecological footprints. According to Girardet, the key to the reduction of urban ecological footprint lies in cities adopting a circular metabolism where consumption is reduced by implementing efficiencies and reuse of resources are maximized. What can be deduced from today's discussion? That we can see that urban environmental sustainability is the need of the hour. We also have seen that urban sustainability revolves around issues of environmental protection, environmental viability, and also the question of social and economic equity. We have also learned today that cities have to be sustainable, otherwise they cannot be empowering or developed in the long run. We also need to understand that if economic growth impairs the environment of the cities, then cities will become uninhabitable in the long run, because city dwellers need clean air to breathe, clean water to drink, as well as a sustainable environment to spend their lives. Thus, we need to understand that urban environmental sustainability should focus on a balance between urban living without causing harm to the poor population, and they should not be at the receiving end of urban development. Finally, as a word of caution, we need to understand that it is good to have megacities, satellite cities, and compact cities, but such cities should not be built at the cost of environment. That's all for today. Thank you.